There is a skeleton, 46,000 years old, found in a cave in Iraq, and when archaeologists examined it, they found something that changed everything we thought we knew about prehistoric humans. The man had survived for years, with a withered arm, a missing hand, blind in one eye. He could not hunt, he could not gather, he could not defend himself. By every rule of survival, he should have been dead. He wasn't. Someone fed him, someone protected him, someone kept him alive. And that raises a question that nobody talks about. If ancient humans cared for the physically disabled, what did they do with the mentally ill? We have a story we tell ourselves about our ancestors. That they were brutal, efficient, that weakness meant death, that survival of the fittest meant exactly what it sounds like. The strong live, the weak disappear. And for a long time, that's what we believed. That anyone who couldn't contribute was abandoned, left behind, forgotten. But the evidence keeps telling a different story, a more complicated one, a more human one. And nowhere is that story more surprising than when we ask what happened to the ones who lost their minds. First, let's understand something. Mental illness is not modern. It did not appear with smartphones. It did not arrive with industrial anxiety or social media or the pressure of the modern world. It is as old as the human brain itself, because the same brain that allowed us to plan, to imagine, to build civilizations, is the same brain that can turn on itself. Depression, schizophrenia, psychosis, mania. These are not products of modern stress. They are written into the architecture of what we are. Schizophrenia affects roughly 1% of every human population ever studied. Everywhere, every culture, every century. 1 in 100 people. Which means in a band of 50 ancient humans sitting around a fire, one of them was likely experiencing something the others couldn't see. Hearing voices, seeing things that weren't there, disconnected from the reality everyone else shared. So what happened to them? For a long time, the assumption was simple. They died. They were abandoned, driven out, maybe killed, because a group on the edge of survival couldn't afford passengers. That was the theory. Clean, logical, cold, and almost certainly wrong. Because the archaeological record keeps showing us something different. Something that forces us to reconsider everything. Let's go back 100,000 years. A woman in what is now Morocco. She has been dead for a very long time when researchers find her, but her bones tell a story. She had a condition that would have caused severe cognitive impairment, intellectual disability, possibly behavioral disruption. She could not have survived alone. She lived into adulthood. Someone took care of her. Not for a week, not for a season, for years. Or consider the site at Atapuerca in Spain, 430,000 years ago. Researchers found the remains of a young person with craniosynostosis, a condition where the skull fuses prematurely. It causes developmental problems, cognitive difficulties, neurological differences. And yet this individual survived well past the age where the condition would have been obvious, past the point where their difference would have been visible to everyone around them. Someone knew, and someone chose to keep them alive anyway. These aren't isolated cases. Across the world, across hundreds of thousands of years, the archaeological record shows the same pattern. People who could not have survived alone, who did. Not because they were hidden, not because no one noticed, but because their communities made a choice. The oldest known act of human compassion isn't a poem. It isn't a temple. It is a disabled person who lived longer than they should have, because someone decided they were worth keeping. But here's where it gets more complicated. Because mental illness is not the same as physical disability. A person with a broken body can still be understood, still be recognized as the same person, still occupy a familiar place in the group. But someone whose mind has fractured? Someone who hears voices that no one else hears? Who sees patterns in the sky that others cannot see? Who speaks in ways that don't connect to shared reality? That is something different. Something that would have been frightening, bewildering, impossible to explain. So how did ancient humans make sense of it? The answer, almost universally, was the same. They decided it was supernatural. In virtually every ancient culture ever studied by anthropologists, the person who behaved outside the boundaries of shared reality was not seen as broken. They were seen as connected to something beyond the ordinary world, to spirits, to ancestors, to forces that normal people could not access. The voices they heard were real. The visions they saw were messages. The disconnection from ordinary reality was not a malfunction. It was a doorway. Think about what this means. A young man in a Paleolithic band begins hearing voices. He stops sleeping. He wanders at night. He speaks about things no one else can perceive. In the modern world, we would call that schizophrenia. In the ancient world, he was the one the spirits had chosen. He was the one who could travel between worlds. He was the shaman. The word shaman comes from the Tungusic languages of Siberia. But the concept? The concept is everywhere. Every continent, every culture, every civilization. A figure who stands at the boundary between the ordinary world and something beyond it, who can communicate with forces that normal people cannot perceive, who mediates between the living and the dead, between the seen and the unseen. Anthropologists have noted for decades that the psychological profile of the shaman overlaps significantly with what we would today diagnose as serious mental illness. Hearing voices, visions, episodes of dissociation, periods of extreme altered states. What we call symptoms, they called gifts. In 2015, researchers published a study in the journal Schizophrenia Research. They interviewed people from different cultures who had what we would clinically classify as psychosis. People in Ghana, in Vietnam, in the United States. And they found something striking. In Ghana and Vietnam, many people reported that the voices they heard were not just terrifying, they were familiar, sometimes helpful, sometimes the voice of an ancestor, sometimes the voice of God. They had a framework for what was happening to them. It was frightening, yes, but it was not meaningless. In the United States, the voices were almost universally experienced as hostile, threatening, random, meaningless. Same brain, same illness, completely different experience. Because the culture around them shaped how the illness was understood, and how it was understood shaped how it was experienced. This is not a small thing. This is one of the most important findings in modern psychiatry, that the story a culture tells about madness changes what madness feels like from the inside. Ancient cultures told a story that gave the experience meaning, that placed the person experiencing it inside a framework where their suffering had a purpose, where they were not broken, but chosen. And that story may have saved lives in ways we are only beginning to understand. But let's not romanticize this, because the ancient world was not gentle. Not always, not everywhere. There were cultures that feared the mentally ill, that believed psychosis was demonic possession, that the appropriate response was not care, but containment, binding, isolation, rituals designed to drive out whatever had taken hold of the person. Some of those rituals were brutal. Trepanation is one of the oldest known surgical procedures. Holes drilled through the living skull. Some researchers believe it was done to release evil spirits believed to be causing madness. We find skulls with these holes from every continent, going back 10,000 years. Some of those patients survived. The bone around the hole shows signs of regrowth. They lived with a hole in their skull. Whether it helped is a different question. And yet even here, even in this, we find something unexpected, because many of those trepan skulls show healed edges, which means they didn't just drill and leave. Someone looked after the patient afterward, through what must have been an agonizing recovery. Someone changed the dressing. Someone kept them warm. Someone watched. Even the attempt to cast out the demon included someone staying. Let's move forward in time, because the story doesn't end in prehistory. Ancient Egypt had some of the earliest written records of what we would recognize as psychiatric illness. The Ebers Papyrus, from around 1550 BCE, describes a condition of the heart, a state of mental confusion, of overwhelming despair, and it recommends treatment, not abandonment, not exile, treatment. A combination of physical remedies and what we might today recognize as structured conversation. The priest sitting with the patient, listening, interpreting, offering a framework for understanding what was happening. In ancient Greece, the picture becomes more complex and more familiar. The Greeks were the first Western culture to begin separating the supernatural from the medical. Hippocrates, writing in the 5th century BCE, made a radical claim that mental illness was not caused by demons, it was caused by the brain. He was right. 2,500 years before the tools existed to prove it. He described depression. He described mania. He described a condition that reads remarkably like what we now call postpartum psychosis. And he argued that these were medical problems, with medical solutions. Rest, diet, exercise, structure. He was the first person in recorded history to look at someone experiencing psychosis and say, this person is not possessed. This person is sick. and sick people can be treated. But Hippocrates was not the mainstream. The mainstream was complicated, because the Greeks also believed in divine madness. Plato wrote that madness from the gods was a greater gift than sanity from men. The oracle at Delphi was almost certainly in an altered state, breathing volcanic gases that rose through cracks in the earth, experiencing visions, speaking in fragmented, ambiguous phrases that the most powerful leaders in the ancient world traveled hundreds of miles to hear. What we would today call a psychotic episode was the most valuable thing in Greece. Rome was different. Rome, at its best, built institutions. The first dedicated spaces for housing the mentally ill appear in Roman records. Not prisons, not dungeons, spaces of care. The word used in some Roman texts is valetudinarium, a place of healing, a precursor to what we would eventually call a hospital. At its worst, Rome was brutal. Roman law had complex provisions for people deemed unable to manage their own affairs. Guardianship, legal incapacity, the idea that some people needed to be managed rather than treated, the tension between care and control, between compassion and containment. That tension was not invented in the modern world. It is as old as civilization itself. And then came the Middle Ages, and the story darkens, because the framework that had allowed some cultures to treat mental illness as a medical problem was replaced by a framework that was almost entirely supernatural. Madness was possession. The appropriate treatment was exorcism. And if exorcism failed, the methodology became increasingly desperate and increasingly violent. We know about this period not because the records are complete, but because the survivors left traces, in church records, in court documents, in the accounts of people who witnessed what was done in the name of healing. People were beaten, starved, isolated in conditions that would worsen any psychiatric condition, on the theory that making the body unbearable would drive out the spirit that had taken it. It is one of the darkest chapters in the history of human treatment of human suffering. But even here, even in the darkest period, the pattern holds. Because alongside the exorcisms and the violence, there were monasteries. There were religious communities that ran something closer to hospitals, that took in the mentally ill, that housed them, fed them, gave them structure and care. Not because they understood what was wrong, but because they believed that every human being was made in the image of something sacred, and that whatever had happened to the mind, the person remained, worthy of care, worthy of dignity. The same impulse that kept that man alive in Iraq 46,000 years ago, still operating, still refusing to let the weak simply disappear. In 705 CE in Baghdad, the first dedicated psychiatric hospital in the world was established. Not in Europe, in the Islamic world, at a time when European medicine was largely stagnant. Islamic physicians were conducting what we would recognize as clinical psychiatry. They classified mental illnesses. They distinguished between different types of psychosis. They debated causes. They developed treatments. Al-Razi, one of the greatest physicians of the medieval world, argued that mental illness was a disease of the brain, not the soul, and that it required physicians, not priests. He was saying, in the 9th century, what Hippocrates had said in the 5th century BCE, and what too many people in between had forgotten. The first psychiatric hospital in Europe opened in Valencia, Spain in 1409. By 1547, Bethlem Royal Hospital in London was already infamous. Bethlem, better known by a corruption of its name, Bedlam, a word that entered the English language as a synonym for chaos, for madness, for a place where suffering was on display rather than being treated. Because for much of its history, Bethlem charged admission. People paid to watch the patients, as entertainment, as spectacle, as a reminder that whatever they were struggling with in their own lives, at least they weren't that. It would take centuries more, and the work of reformers whose names are not famous enough. Philippe Pinel in France, Dorothea Dix in America, William Tuke in England. People who looked at what was being done in the name of treatment and refused to accept it. Who argued that the mentally ill were not animals, not spectacles, not dangerous cargo to be warehoused, but people who were suffering, and who deserved the same compassion that an ancient community in Iraq had shown to a man with a withered arm. 46,000 years before anyone wrote it down. We still haven't got this right, not entirely. The history of humanity's treatment of mental illness is not a clean arc from darkness to light. It is a story of the same tension, repeated across every culture, every century. Compassion and fear, understanding and superstition, the impulse to care, and the impulse to contain. We still debate how much freedom to give those whose minds work differently. We still struggle with the line between treatment and control. We still underfund mental health care in almost every country on Earth. We still stigmatize. We still look away. But here's what the bones tell us. Here's what 46,000 years of evidence actually shows. The impulse to care was always there, even before language, even before religion, even before civilization, before any of the frameworks we built to explain what madness was or where it came from. There was a person who couldn't function alone, and a community that fed them anyway. That man in the Iraqi cave. We don't know his name. We don't know what he believed. We don't know what his community thought was wrong with him, or right with him. We just know he lived, longer than he should have, because someone decided he mattered. That is the oldest human instinct we have evidence for. Older than art, older than burial, older than any god anyone has ever worshipped. The decision that a suffering person is still a person, worth staying for. We came from that, all of us, from people who stayed. The question is whether we still are.